Hello and welcome. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Take a moment to let yourself arrive fully in this space. Adjust your pillow until it cradles your head just right. Pull your blanket up to your chin and feel the softness surrounding you. Notice how your bed holds you, supports you. There's nowhere else you need to be. Nothing calling for your attention. This time belongs only to you. Tonight, we're traveling together to a small village tucked into the mountains, where snow falls gently and the smell of fresh bread fills the air each morning. We'll meet Thomas, a baker who has kneaded dough with the same loving hands for 27 years, and Biscuit, his golden retriever, who greets every customer with the same gentle joy. It's a story of warm ovens and cold mornings, of showing up day after day, of how the smallest acts of kindness can build something beautiful. But first, let's breathe together. 3 slow, deep breaths. Breathe in through your nose, slowly, feeling cool air fill your lungs. And now let it go, releasing anything you've been carrying from today. Once more, breathe in deeply and out, feeling your whole body become just a little bit heavier, a little more relaxed. And one last time, in and out. Perfect. As we move through this story, you may find yourself drifting away, slipping in and out of sleep. That's exactly right. That's exactly what should happen. Let the words flow over you like warm water. If you wake and we're somewhere new in the tale, just settle back in and let the story carry you. This is a story about bread and snow, about routine and belonging, about a golden dog and the people who gather around a village bakery. It's about winter mornings and the warmth we create together. So let your eyes close gently, feel yourself sinking deeper into comfort, and let's begin our journey to Snowbell Village. The December snow fell softly over Snowbell Village, each flake drifting down in its own gentle time, settling onto rooftops and fence posts and the bare branches of oak trees that lined the village square. The world was hushed in that particular way that only happens when snow is falling in the deep hours before dawn, when the sky holds a purple-gray light that isn't quite darkness anymore, but hasn't yet become morning. The air smelled clean and cold, with that crystalline sharpness that catches in your throat when you breathe deeply, mixing with the faint scent of wood smoke from chimneys where fires had burned low through the night. Thomas Wright stood in his bakery kitchen, his hands dusted white with flour, just as they had been every morning for 27 years. The warmth from the ovens surrounded him like an embrace, a gentle heat that seeped into his bones and made the cold December morning feel far away, even though he could see snow falling past the window above his work table. He had woken at 4:30, just as he always did, in the small apartment above the bakery where he had lived alone since his wife had passed, gently in her sleep 8 years ago, a loss he carried quietly, like a smooth stone in his pocket, something he had learned to hold without letting it weigh him down completely. The kitchen smelled of yeast and butter, of cinnamon and vanilla, of the sourdough starter that lived in a ceramic crock on the counter and had been fed and tended for longer than Thomas had owned the bakery. His predecessor, old Mr. Hendricks, had given him the starter on his last day of work, along with the brass key to the front door and a worn leather journal filled with recipes written in a careful, slanting hand. Thomas had added his own recipes over the years, his handwriting appearing on pages that followed Mr. Hendricks's notes about proper oven temperature and the best way to shape a loaf so it would rise evenly. Biscuit lay on his bed near the ovens, a thick cushion that had molded itself to the shape of his body over the years. The golden retriever was 10 years old now, his muzzle touched with white, his movements a bit slower than they had been when Thomas had found him as a stray puppy shivering behind the bakery one January morning. The dog's eyes were closed, but his tail thumped softly against the cushion, a rhythmic sound that told Thomas he was awake and content, simply resting in the warmth while his person worked. Thomas measured flour into the large ceramic bowl he always used for the day's first batch of bread, his movements practiced and sure. 3 cups for the white loaves, 4 for the whole wheat, a careful addition of salt and sugar, the sourdough starter that bubbled gently and smelled pleasantly sour. His hands moved through the familiar motions without need for thought, leaving his mind free to wander, to notice the sound of snow tapping gently against the window, to hear the old building settling around him with its comfortable creaks and sighs. The dough came together under his hands, rough at first, then gradually smoother as he kneaded it on the floured wooden board that had worn smooth from decades of use. Push and fold, turn and push again, the heel of his palm pressing down and forward, his fingers gathering the dough back toward him. The rhythm was meditative, calming, a practice that had carried him through grief and loneliness and the simple passage of years. In the kneading, he found a kind of peace, a reminder that showing up and doing the work day after day created something nourishing and good. The radiators clanked gently as they warmed, adding their voice to the quiet symphony of the morning. Thomas could hear, very faintly, the church bells from St. Anne's at the far end of the village square, marking 5 o'clock, right on time, as they had been for over 100 years, their sound muffled by the falling snow, but still clear enough to count. 5 deep tones that rolled across the sleeping village, a reassurance that time continued its steady march, that this morning was like all the mornings before it, reliable and known. Biscuit lifted his head at the sound of the bells, ears perking forward, then settled back down with a contented sigh that ruffled the fur on his chest. Thomas smiled at him, that private smile that people share with their animals, full of affection and understanding. "Good morning, old friend," he said softly, and Biscuit's tail thumped twice in reply. Thomas shaped the first loaves and set them in the proofing baskets, covering them with clean flour sack towels that had been washed so many times they were soft as silk. The dough would rise while he prepared the sweet rolls, the cinnamon twists, the apple turnovers that Mrs. Patterson always bought on Wednesdays for her book club. He had learned her patterns, and the patterns of everyone in Snowbell Village, the way a baker must. He knew that Dr. Morrison liked the 7-grain bread, that young Emma Chen always chose the chocolate croissant after her piano lessons, that Father Michael from St. Anne's preferred the simple white rolls, which he said reminded him of his childhood in Ireland. The eastern window began to show the first hints of true dawn, the sky lightening from deep purple to a softer lavender, the snow still falling in its gentle, endless dance. Thomas moved to start the coffee, filling the old percolator with water from the tap that ran cold and clean, spooning grounds into the basket with the same care he brought to everything. The bakery would open at 7, and the villagers would begin to arrive, drawn by the light in the window and the smell of bread that would drift out into the snowy morning. He worked steadily, peacefully, adding wood to the ovens to keep the temperature even, checking the first loaves, beginning the sweet dough for the cinnamon rolls. His hands were warm from the work, his back slightly tired from bending over the table, his heart quiet and steady in his chest. This was his life, had been his life for 27 years, and he had learned to find contentment in the repetition, in the knowing that he was creating something nourishing not just bodies, but spirits, that his bakery was a gathering place, a warm spot in the cold winter, a place where people came not just for bread, but for connection. At 6 o'clock, Thomas took his first break, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the percolator and sitting on the tall stool by the window. Biscuit rose from his bed, stretched long and luxuriously, and came to sit beside Thomas, leaning his warm weight against his person leg. Thomas rested one hand on the dog's head, scratching gently behind his ears while he sipped his coffee and watched the village wake up. Lights were coming on in windows across the square. Thomas could see Margaret Foster's lamp glowing in her upstairs bedroom, right on schedule at 6:15, as it had been every morning as long as he could remember. She was 73 now, a retired school teacher who still kept strict hours, who would arrive at the bakery at precisely 7:30 for her daily scone and cup of tea, which she would take at the small table by the window while she read the regional newspaper from cover to cover. He could see smoke rising from the chimney of the tea shop across the square, where Helen would be starting her own morning preparations, heating water for the dozens of pots of tea she would serve throughout the day. Helen was 45, had moved to Snowbell Village 12 years ago after a divorce, and opened the tea shop with what I suspect was the last of her savings and a tremendous amount of courage. She bought bread from him every day, the honey oat loaf, which she sliced and toasted and served with jam and butter to her afternoon customers. The snow was beginning to slow, the flakes growing smaller and farther apart, and Thomas knew that by the time he opened the doors, it would have stopped completely, leaving the village blanketed in fresh white, the streets muffled and clean, the air crisp and perfect for a winter morning. He finished his coffee, gave Biscuit one more scratch behind the ears, and returned to his work. The sweet rolls went into the oven, their smell mixing with the bread smell, creating that perfect bakery scent that Thomas knew would drift out into the square and draw people in, even those who hadn't planned to stop. He had learned this over the years, that the smell of cinnamon and yeast was irresistible on a cold morning, that people followed their noses to warmth and comfort, that a bakery was a kind of beacon, especially in winter. At 6:30, Thomas unlocked the front door and turned on the lights in the shop, the warm glow spilling out onto the snow-covered sidewalk. The display cases were already filled with the morning's work, crusty baguettes standing upright in their basket, round boules with their flour-dusted tops, the braided challah that Mrs. Goldstein brought every Friday, the rye bread with caraway seeds that reminded the older villagers of their childhood. He arranged the sweet rolls on their trays, the apple turnovers, the cheese danishes, the chocolate croissants. Biscuit took his place on the thick rug just inside the door, a position he had claimed as his own years ago. From here, he could greet every customer who entered, could wag his tail and accept the pats and scratches that people always offered, could keep watch over his domain with the peaceful authority of a beloved village dog who knew himself to be important. At 7 o'clock exactly, Thomas turned the sign on the door from closed to open, and almost immediately the bells above the door chimed their bright welcome. His first customer, as always, was Robert Chin, the village postmaster, stamping snow from his boots and unwrapping the scarf from around his neck. "Morning, Thomas," Robert said, his breath still misting in the warm air of the shop. "Cold one today." "Morning, Robert," Thomas replied, already reaching for the sesame bagel that Robert bought every morning, along with a large coffee, which he would drink while sorting the morning mail. "Snow's stopped, though. Should be a beautiful day." Robert was 62, had been postmaster for 35 years, and had known Thomas since Thomas was a boy helping in his father's hardware store. They shared the comfortable silence of old friends while Thomas filled a paper bag with the bagel and poured coffee into a paper cup, adding cream and 1 sugar, just as Robert liked it. Biscuit had risen to greet Robert, tail wagging, and Robert bent to give him the expected attention, running his hand along the dog's silky head. Good boy, Biscuit, keeping everyone in line? The morning continued in its familiar rhythm. Mrs. Patterson arrived at 7:15 for her weekly turnovers, buying 6 of them, which she arranged carefully in the white bakery box that Thomas tied with string. She told him about the book her club was reading, a mystery set in Scotland, and Thomas listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made her eyes light up with pleasure at having someone to talk to about the things she loved. At 7:30 precisely, Margaret Foster came in, brushing snow from her wool coat, her white hair perfectly styled, her posture as straight as it had been when she taught 3rd grade for 40 years. Thomas had her scone and tea ready, knowing her timing, and she thanked him with the same gracious smile she had given to generations of students. "The snow makes everything so peaceful, doesn't it?" she settled at her table by the window, "like the world has been washed clean." "It does," Thomas agreed, and he meant it. There was something about snow that quieted everything, that created a sense of new beginnings, of gentle possibility. The morning flowed forward, each customer arriving in their time, each interaction warm and familiar. Dr. Morrison, who ran the village's small medical clinic, came in at 8 for his 7-grain bread and told Thomas about the new medical journal he was reading. Young Emma Chen stopped in before school with her mother, choosing her chocolate croissant and giving Biscuit a gentle pat that made the dog's tail sweep back and forth across the floor. Father Michael arrived at 8:30, buying his white rolls and mentioning that the church furnace was acting up again, wondering if Thomas knew anyone who could take a look at it. "I'll ask around," Thomas promised, already thinking of David Sullivan, the handyman who lived at the edge of the village and had a gift for coaxing old systems back to life. "I'm sure we can find someone to help." This was how it worked in Snowbell Village, this exchange of needs and offerings, this network of care that connected everyone. Thomas was at the center of it in many ways, not because he sought that position, but because the bakery was a gathering place, because people came here every day and shared their lives in small increments, and because Thomas listened and remembered and helped where he could. By 9 o'clock, the morning rush had settled into a steadier stream. Thomas restocked the display cases, wiped down the counter, refilled Biscuit's water bowl. The dog had greeted perhaps 20 people by now, had accepted scratches and kind words from each of them, and seemed perfectly content with his role as official bakery greeter. Helen Brooks came in at 9:30, as she always did, to buy her honey oat loaf. She was a slender woman with kind eyes and hands that were always busy, always creating something, knitting scarves for the village charity auction, arranging flowers from her garden in summer, painting watercolors that she sometimes gave away as gifts. "How's business this morning?" Thomas asked as he sliced the loaf for her. "Quiet so far, but it'll pick up at lunch," Helen said. "The snow always brings people in for something warm." She paused, then added, "I'm thinking of hosting a tea tasting next month. Would you be willing to provide some pastries?" "Of course," Thomas said immediately. "Just let me know what you need." This was another thread in the village fabric, this collaboration between the businesses on the square. They supported each other, promoted each other, understood that when one of them thrived, all of them benefited. Helen's tea shop brought people to the square, and those people often stopped at the bakery. Thomas's bakery drew morning crowds who then wandered over to browse the bookshop or visit the small art gallery. It was an ecosystem of mutual care. At 10 o'clock, Thomas took his second break, making himself a sandwich from the bread he had pulled from the ovens earlier, adding cheese and lettuce and tomato, the simple things that tasted extraordinary when the bread was still slightly warm. He sat at the small table in the kitchen, and Biscuit lay at his feet, the dog's steady breathing and the warmth of his presence a comfort that Thomas had learned not to take for granted. The kitchen was quiet now, the morning's baking complete, the oven still warm but no longer roaring. Thomas could hear the muffled sounds of the village through the walls, a car passing on the street, someone calling a greeting to a neighbor, the faint sound of children's laughter from the direction of the school. These sounds were the heartbeat of the place he had lived his entire life, the rhythms that marked his days and gave them meaning. He thought, as he sometimes did during these quiet moments, about his wife, Catherine, who had loved this bakery as much as he did, who had worked beside him for 19 years before her heart had simply stopped one night while she slept. He missed her still, but the grief had softened over time, had become something he could live with, something that made him appreciate the small moments of connection he shared with others. Catherine would have loved Biscuit, he thought. She would have slipped him treats when she thought Thomas wasn't looking, would have knitted him a sweater for the coldest winter days. The afternoon brought its own rhythm, slower than the morning, but still steady. The lunchtime customers arrived, people buying sandwiches on fresh bread, pastries to accompany their afternoon tea, extra loaves to freeze for later in the week. Thomas served them all with the same care, the same attention, learning new details about their lives, offering encouragement where it seemed needed, simply being present in a way that he had learned mattered more than people often acknowledged. At 3 o'clock, the school let out, and a handful of children stopped by, their cheeks red from the cold, their voices bright with the freedom of the afternoon. They pressed their noses against the display case, debating between cookies and muffins, counting their coins carefully. Thomas always made sure to have something affordable for them, remembered being young himself and how important it had felt to have a few coins to spend on something sweet. One little girl, Sarah, who was perhaps 7 years old, came in without any money just to see Biscuit. She sat on the floor beside the dog, whispering secrets into his ear, while Biscuit listened with patient attention. Her mother, Thomas knew, worked 2 jobs and struggled to make ends meet, and he had developed a habit of having a damaged cookie or muffin that he needed to get rid of, which he would offer to Sarah with great seriousness, as if she were doing him a favor by taking it. Today, he presented her with a slightly lopsided chocolate chip cookie. "Sarah, would you mind helping me out? This one didn't come out quite right and I can't sell it, but I hate to waste it." Sarah's eyes lit up. "I can help," she said solemnly, taking the cookie with both hands as if it were treasure. "Thank you," Thomas said, just as solemnly. "You're saving me from a terrible waste." She sat with Biscuit, eating her cookie in small, careful bites, making it last, and Thomas felt his heart grow warm at the simple joy on her face. This, he thought, was what the bakery was really for, not just bread and pastries, but these moments of gentleness, of care, of making sure that everyone, even a 7-year-old with no money, felt welcomed and valued. The afternoon settled into evening, the light outside shifting from bright white to a softer blue-gray as the sun moved lower in the winter sky. Thomas began his closing routine at 5:30, wiping down surfaces, washing the day's dishes, storing the leftover bread in baskets that he would distribute to those who needed it, the elderly living alone, the young families struggling to get by, the church for their community meals. At 6 o'clock, he locked the front door and turned off the lights in the shop. Biscuit stretched and yawned, ready for their evening walk around the square before dinner. Thomas put on his coat and wrapped his scarf around his neck, feeling the cold air rush in when he opened the door, carrying with it the scent of snow and wood smoke and winter darkness. They walked slowly, Biscuit stopping to sniff at fence posts and snowbanks, Thomas pausing to look at the village square all lit up for the season, the strings of white lights wrapped around the oak trees, the wreaths on every shop door, the warm glow from windows where families were settling in for the evening. He felt a deep sense of belonging here, of being woven into the fabric of this place, of mattering in the small daily ways that added up to a life. Back in his apartment, Thomas made a simple dinner: soup from the pot he kept simmering on the stove, bread from the morning's baking, a cup of tea. Biscuit ate his own dinner with enthusiasm, then settled onto his bed by the radiator with a satisfied sigh. Thomas sat in his armchair by the window, looking out at the snow-covered square, at the peaceful evening settling over Snowbell Village. Tomorrow, he would wake up at 4:30 a.m. and begin again. The ovens would warm, the dough would rise, the smell of bread would fill the air. People would come, seeking nourishment and warmth and a moment of connection. Biscuit would greet them with his wagging tail. The day would unfold in its familiar patterns, and Thomas would be there, showing up as he always did, doing the work that gave his life meaning. He felt a deep contentment settle over him as he sat there in the warm lamplight, Biscuit breathing steadily nearby, the snow falling gently outside his window. This was enough, he thought. This was more than enough. This was home. The morning of December 15th dawned clear and bright. The sky a hard blue dome above Snowbell Village, the sun reflecting off fresh snow in a way that made everything sparkle and shine. Thomas stood at his kitchen window, the same ceramic mug warming his hands, watching the light change from pale dawn to brilliant morning. The temperature had dropped during the night, and frost had formed intricate patterns on the inside of the windows, delicate ferns and feathers that would melt as soon as the heat from the ovens reached them fully. Biscuit was already awake, sitting by his food bowl with that patient expectation that dogs have, knowing that breakfast would come in its time, willing to wait but making his presence known. Thomas smiled and filled the bowl, then moved to begin his own morning ritual, the one that had shaped his days for 27 years and would shape this one too, even though this day would bring something new, something unexpected, though he didn't know it yet. The familiar rhythm of measuring and mixing, of kneading and shaping, carried him through the dark hours before dawn. The ovens filled the kitchen with their steady warmth, and the smell of yeast and flour began its daily transformation into the smell of bread, that ancient alchemy that never failed to feel like a small miracle. Thomas had learned not to take it for granted, this daily wonder, this creation of nourishment from such simple ingredients. At 7 o'clock, he opened the bakery doors to find Robert Chen already waiting, stamping his feet against the cold, his breath puffing out in white clouds that caught the morning light. "Bitter cold this morning," Robert said, stepping gratefully into the warmth. "Must be 10 below out there." Thomas handed him his sesame bagel and coffee, adding an extra splash of cream without being asked. "The cold keeps things crisp and beautiful, though. Look at how clear the sky is." They both turned to look out the window at the brilliant blue sky, and Robert nodded. "True enough, beautiful morning, even if my fingers about froze walking over here." Biscuit greeted Robert with his usual enthusiasm, and Robert bent to give him attention, his stiff fingers warming themselves in the dog's soft fur. This small exchange, this moment of connection and care, was repeated dozens of times each morning, and Thomas had learned to see it for what it was: the building blocks of community, the small stones that created the foundation of belonging. The morning continued its familiar flow. Mrs. Patterson arrived for her turnovers. Margaret Foster took her usual table with her scone and tea. Dr. Morrison bought his 7-grain bread and mentioned that his daughter was coming to visit for Christmas. Each person brought news and warmth, and Thomas listened and responded, feeling the threads of connection weaving together as they did every day. At 9:30, just as Helen Brooks was leaving with her honey oat loaf, the bells above the door chimed again, and Thomas looked up to see a face he didn't recognize. A woman perhaps in her early 30s, with dark curly hair escaping from beneath a knit cap, her cheeks pink from the cold, her eyes bright and slightly uncertain. "Good morning," Thomas said warmly, the way he greeted everyone who came through his door. "Welcome to Wright's Bakery." The woman smiled, a quick, nervous smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning. I've just moved to the village. Yesterday, actually. I'm renting the cottage behind the church." She spoke quickly as if she wasn't quite sure of her welcome, and Thomas recognized the particular vulnerability of being new in a small place where everyone else has known each other for decades. "Welcome to Snowbell Village," he said, putting as much genuine warmth into his voice as he could. "I'm Thomas Wright, and this is Biscuit." The dog had already approached the newcomer, tail wagging, offering his usual greeting. The woman bent to pet Biscuit, and some of the tension left her shoulders. "I'm Rachel Moore. I'm going to be teaching music at the school. I start after the winter break." "A music teacher," Thomas said, pleased. "The village has been wanting one for years. The children will be so happy." He gestured to the display cases. "What can I get you for this morning? Everything's fresh from the ovens." Rachel studied the bread and pastries with a kind of hunger that Thomas recognized as being about more than just food. She was looking for connection, for a foothold in this new place, for some sign that she had made the right choice in coming here. He had seen this look on the faces of newcomers before, and it always awakened in him a desire to help, to make the path easier, to offer the warmth that would help someone take root. "Everything looks wonderful," Rachel said. "I don't even know where to start. What do you recommend?" Thomas thought for a moment, then began to gather items: a loaf of the honey oat bread, 2 cinnamon rolls, a bag of mixed cookies. "These are some favorites. The honey oat is what most people buy for their daily bread. The cinnamon rolls are good for breakfast. And the cookies, well, everyone needs cookies." Rachel laughed, a real laugh this time, and her whole face changed, became younger and more open. "You're very persuasive. I'll take all of it." While Thomas wrapped her purchases, he asked gentle questions: where she had moved from, a city 3 hours south, what had brought her to Snowbell Village, a desire for a quieter life, for community, for the chance to really know her students, and whether she had everything she needed in her cottage, mostly, though the heating was a bit temperamental. "David Sullivan is the person to call about the heating," told Thomas, writing the number on a piece of paper. "He's a handyman, lives just outside the village, and he's wonderful with old systems. Tell him I sent you." Rachel took the paper with gratitude that seemed disproportionate to the small gesture, and Thomas understood that too. When you're new and uncertain, every kindness feels enormous. Every piece of help is a lifeline. "Thank you," she said. "Everyone told me small villages could be unwelcoming to outsiders, but you've been so kind."
"Snowbell Village isn't like that," Thomas said, and he meant it. "We're happy to have new people, new energy. You'll see. Give it a few weeks and you'll know everyone, and everyone will know you." After Rachel left, Helen Brooks, who had been lingering near the door, stepped back in. "New music teacher?" she asked, her eyes bright with interest. "Starting after winter break," Thomas confirmed. "She seems nice, a bit nervous." "We should organize a welcome," Helen said immediately. "Maybe a tea at my shop. Introduce her to people properly." This was how it worked in Snowbell Village, this immediate movement toward inclusion, toward welcome. Thomas felt a warm satisfaction at seeing it unfold. "That's a wonderful idea. Let me know when and I'll provide pastries." The day continued, but Thomas found his thoughts returning to Rachel Moore and her nervousness, her hope, her obvious desire to belong. He knew that feeling, even though he had lived here all his life. After Catherine died, he had felt untethered for a while, had worried that without her he might drift away from the community they had built together. But the village had held him close, had shown up for him in countless small ways, and he had learned that belonging wasn't something you earned once and kept forever. It was something you built every day, through showing up, through small acts of care, through being present for others. At lunchtime, Father Michael stopped by for his white rolls and mentioned that he had met the new tenant in the cottage. "She seems like a lovely young woman," he said. "A bit lonely, I think. I invited her to the Christmas service, and she seemed pleased." "Helen's organizing a welcome tea," Thomas told him. "We'll make sure she feels at home." Father Michael nodded approvingly. "That's good. That's exactly right. Everyone needs to know they belong somewhere." In the afternoon, as Thomas was restocking the display case, Robert Chen came back in, which was unusual. Robert only ever came in the morning. He had a thoughtful look on his face and was carrying a small bundle of letters. "Thomas, I've got something interesting," Robert said, setting the letters on the counter. "These came in today's mail addressed to the bakery, old letters by the looks of them, and they've been traveling for a while. The postmarks are from all over, California, Maine, Colorado, all from different people, but all addressed to Wright's Bakery, Snowbell Village." Thomas wiped his hands on the apron and picked up the first letter. The envelope was good quality paper, slightly yellowed, and the handwriting was careful and old-fashioned. He opened it and began to read. "Dear Wright's Bakery," the letter began. "I don't know if anyone there will remember me, but I lived in Snowbell Village as a child in the 1960s. My father was the doctor then, Dr. James Morrison, though he passed away many years ago. I'm writing because I've been thinking about the bakery lately, about the smell of bread in the morning and how safe it made me feel. My father would take me there every Saturday morning, and Mr. Hendricks, I think that was the baker's name, would give me a cookie and ask about my week. Those small kindnesses meant more than I knew at the time. I wanted to thank you all these years later for being a place of warmth and welcome. I hope the bakery is still there, still filling the village with that wonderful smell. With gratitude, Patricia Morrison Williams." Thomas felt something tight and warm in his chest as he read. He opened the second letter and then the third. Each one was similar, a memory of the bakery from years past, from decades past, from people who had lived in Snowbell Village as children or young adults and had moved away but still carried the memory of this place with them. Some remembered Mr. Hendricks, some remembered Thomas's own father, who had worked at the bakery part-time during the summers. All of them remembered the warmth, the welcome, the sense of belonging that the bakery had given them. Robert watched Thomas's face as he read. "Beautiful, aren't they? I don't know what prompted all these people to write now, but there are 7 letters total. All arrived today." "It's like they all had the same thought at the same time," Thomas said wonderingly. "All these people scattered across the country, all thinking about the bakery, all wanting to say thank you." He read through all 7 letters, each one adding to the portrait of what the bakery had meant over the years, how it had touched lives in ways that Thomas had never fully appreciated. He thought of all the mornings he had shown up, had mixed and kneaded and baked, had greeted customers and listened to their stories, never knowing that these small acts would echo forward through time, would be remembered and treasured by people he had never met or forgotten. "I think we should share these," Robert said quietly. "The whole village would love to read them. It's a reminder of why what you do matters, Thomas." Thomas nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He had never sought recognition, had never thought of his work as particularly important. He was just a baker, doing what bakers had always done. But these letters showed him something different. They showed him that the daily ritual of opening the doors, of creating warmth and welcome, of being present and kind, had created something larger than he had known. The bakery was a touchstone, a place that people carried with them even after they left, a reminder that they had belonged somewhere, that they had been seen and valued. Thomas said finally, "I'll make copies. We can put them up in the shop, share them with people." After Robert left, Thomas sat at the small table in the kitchen, reading through the letters again. Biscuit came to sit beside him, resting his head on Thomas's knee, and Thomas absently stroked the dog's ears while he thought about legacy and connection, about how the work we do echoes forward in ways we can't always see or measure. That evening, after closing, Thomas walked to Helen's tea shop, where she was just finishing her own day. He showed her the letters, and her eyes filled with tears as she read them.
"Oh, Thomas," she said, "this is so beautiful. We really do matter to each other, don't we? The small things we do really do make a difference." "I think they do," Thomas said. "I'm starting to see that more clearly." They talked about Rachel Moore and the welcome tea, about the letters and what they meant, about the upcoming Christmas season and how the village came together during the holidays. Outside the window, snow began to fall again, soft and gentle, and the village square glowed with its strings of lights, peaceful and beautiful in the winter darkness. Walking home with Biscuit later, Thomas felt a deep sense of gratitude for this life he had built, this community he was part of, this daily practice of showing up and caring. The letters had shown him that his work mattered, not in grand or dramatic ways, but in the accumulation of small kindnesses, in the steady offering of warmth and bread and welcome. Tomorrow he would wake at 4:30 and begin again. The ovens would warm, the dough would rise, and people would come. And now, when they came, he would remember that these small daily exchanges were building something larger, creating memories that people would carry with them for decades, planting seeds of belonging that would grow in ways he might never fully see. The snow fell softly as he climbed the stairs to his apartment, Biscuit padding along beside him. Inside, the rooms were warm and welcoming, and Thomas made tea and sat in his armchair, one of the letters in his hand, reading it again in the lamplight. "Thank you for being a place of warmth and welcome," the letter said, and Thomas felt those words settle into his heart like a blessing, like a reminder of why he did what he did, day after day, year after year. He looked at Biscuit, sleeping peacefully by the radiator, and out the window at the snow-covered village square, and he felt that he understood something new about his life, about the bakery, about the quiet power of showing up with kindness. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic changes. It was about this: the daily bread, the warm greeting, the moment of connection. These were the things that mattered. These were the things that would be remembered. And tomorrow, he would offer them again. The morning of December 20th arrived with an unusual stillness, a sense of something gathering. Thomas woke at his customary 4:30 to find the world outside his window completely dark, no moon or stars visible, the air holding that peculiar thickness that comes before heavy snow. He could feel it in his bones, that particular ache that always preceded a storm, and he knew without checking the weather that they were in for something significant. Biscuit seemed to sense it too, staying closer to Thomas than usual as they moved through the morning routine, his brown eyes watchful, his usual calm overlaid with a slight nervousness that dogs sometimes show before big weather changes. Thomas gave him extra scratches behind the ears and spoke to him in the soothing voice he used when the dog needed reassurance. "It's all right, old friend," he said. "Just some snow coming. We've been through worse." The kitchen was warm and bright against the darkness outside, and Thomas moved through his familiar tasks with the same steady care he brought to every morning. The dough came together under his hands, the ovens radiated their comforting heat, and the smell of bread began to fill the air. But he kept glancing at the windows, watching the darkness, feeling the storm approaching like a held breath about to be released. At 6 o'clock, the first flakes began to fall, not the gentle, drifting snow of recent days, but something heavier, more determined. Fat flakes that fell straight down, already beginning to accumulate on the windowsills and railings. Thomas watched them for a moment, calculating. If this continued, the roads would become difficult by mid-morning, dangerous by afternoon. The village would need to pull together, as it always did during big storms. He made his coffee and sat at his window for his morning break, biscuit pressed against his leg. The village square was still dark, only a few lights showing in windows. He could see the snow falling more heavily now, a white curtain between his window and the world, already covering the streets in a fresh layer that would soon become deep. At 7, when he opened the bakery doors, the snow was falling so thickly that he could barely see across the square. Robert Chen arrived within minutes, his scarf wound high around his face, snow already gathering on his shoulders. "Big one coming," Robert said, unwrapping his scarf. "Weather Service is calling for 18 to 24 inches. They're advising everyone to stay home by noon." Thomas handed him his bagel and coffee, both of them understanding without speaking that routines mattered even more during uncertain times, that small normalcies provided anchor points when things became difficult. "We'll manage," Thomas said. "We always do. I'm going to try to finish my route early, get everyone their mail before it becomes impossible to move, but I wanted to check with you first. If we do get snowed in for a few days, there are folks who might need help. Mrs. Foster lives alone, the Johnsons with the new baby, old Mr. Patterson out on Mill Road." Thomas was already thinking the same thing, his mind moving through the village, identifying who might need extra care. "I'll make sure there's bread for anyone who needs it," he said. "We can organize deliveries if necessary." This was the other side of small village life, the responsibility that came with being woven into a community. During storms or difficulties, everyone looked out for each other, and certain people, Thomas, Robert, Dr. Morrison, Father Michael, naturally became coordinators of care, not because anyone appointed them, but because that's how the village had always worked. Margaret Foster arrived at her usual 7:30, though she looked more worried than Thomas had ever seen her. "I probably shouldn't have come," she admitted, "but I didn't want to break my routine." "I'm glad you're here," Thomas said, meaning it. "But when you finish your tea, I think Robert should walk you home. It's getting worse out there." They stood at the window together, watching the snow fall. In the space of just half an hour, it had transformed the village square, covering everything in white, making familiar landmarks seem strange and distant. "I remember the blizzard of 1993, Margaret said quietly. "We were snowed in for 4 days, but everyone helped everyone else, and we made it through just fine." "That's what we'll do this time too," Thomas assured her. By 8 o'clock, the bakery was fuller than usual, people stopping in not just for bread, but for news, for reassurance, for the comfort of being together before they had to hunker down in their own homes. Thomas moved through the crowd, answering questions, offering suggestions, coordinating with Robert and Dr. Morrison about who might need checking on. Rachel Moore came in, looking anxious and a bit lost. She had only been in the village 5 days and didn't yet know the rhythms of how the community handled difficulties. "Should I be worried?" she asked Thomas. "I've never lived anywhere that got this much snow." "You'll be fine," Thomas told her gently. "The cottage is solid and you have heat and food. But tell me, do you have enough groceries, firewood?" Rachel bit her lip. "I was going to go shopping today, actually. I've been eating out mostly since I arrived." Thomas exchanged a glance with Helen Brooks, who had just come in. Without needing to discuss it, they both understood that Rachel needed help, and they both moved to provide it. "Come to my place," Helen said immediately. "I live right above the tea shop, and I always keep my pantry well stocked. You can stay with me until the storm passes. It'll be nice to have company." The relief on Rachel's face was immediate and profound. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "Not an imposition at all," Helen said warmly. "I'd love to have you. We can drink tea and get to know each other. It'll be fun." Thomas packed a bag of bread and pastries for both of them, refusing payment. When Helen tried to pay, he said, "Storm supplies. We take care of each other here."
This scene repeated itself throughout the morning, people identifying needs, others stepping up to meet them, the whole village functioning as a single organism responding to challenge. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson took in the Johnson family, whose heating system was unreliable. Father Michael organized the church basement as a warming center for anyone who needed it. Dr. Morrison made a list of patients he might need to check on and recruited David Sullivan to help him make rounds in David's truck, which had four-wheel drive. By 10 o'clock, Thomas had given away more bread than he had sold, and he felt no regret about it. He had baked extra, anticipating exactly this situation, knowing that in times of need, the bakery's role shifted from business to community service. This was part of his calling, part of what it meant to be at the heart of the village. At 11, as the snow showed no signs of slowing, Thomas made a decision. He would close the bakery early and spend the afternoon making sure everyone was safe. He posted a sign on the door, "Closed due to weather. If you need anything, call," and included his phone number. He loaded up a large basket with bread, filled a thermos with coffee, and bundled himself into his warmest coat. Biscuit looked at him with concern, clearly understanding that they were going out into the storm. "Come on, boy," Thomas said. "We've got work to do." Their first stop was Mrs. Foster's house, just 2 blocks from the bakery, but already requiring effort to walk through the deep snow. Thomas knocked on her door and waited, hearing her slow steps inside. Then her face appeared, relief clear in her eyes. "Thomas and Biscuit, come in, you must be frozen." He stepped into her warm hallway, snow falling from his coat onto her mat. "I brought you some bread, Mrs. Foster, and I wanted to make sure you're all right." "I'm perfectly fine, dear," she said, but he could see the worry in her face, the slight tremor in her hands. She lived alone in this big house, had lived alone since her husband died 15 years ago, and storms made everyone more aware of their vulnerability. "Do you have everything you need? Firewood, food, candles in case the power goes out?" They went through her supplies together, and Thomas made a mental note to check on her again tomorrow. Before he left, he sat with her for a few minutes, drinking tea, letting Biscuit rest by her fire, giving her the gift of company and the reassurance that she wasn't forgotten. "Thank you for thinking of me," she said when he stood to leave. "It means more than you know." "We're neighbors," Thomas said simply. "We take care of each other." The next stop was the cottage behind the church, where he wanted to make sure Rachel had indeed gone to Helen's and hadn't stayed in her unfamiliar cottage alone. He found the place empty, but noticed that the heating was indeed unreliable. The cottage was cold despite the thermostat being set high. He made a mental note to have David Sullivan look at it as soon as the storm passed. Throughout the afternoon, Thomas and Biscuit made their way through the village, checking on people, delivering bread, making sure no one was alone or anxious or in need. The snow continued to fall, relentless and beautiful, transforming the village into something from a storybook, all soft edges and clean whiteness. At the Johnson house, where the young family was staying with the Pattersons, he found a warm scene of intergenerational care. Mrs. Patterson teaching the young mother how to make soup, the baby sleeping peacefully, Mr. Patterson showing the young father his collection of old photographs of the village. They welcomed Thomas and Biscuit warmly, insisted he stay for a bowl of soup, and he sat with them for half an hour, feeling the particular coziness that comes from being safe and warm while a storm rages outside. "This is what community means," Mrs. Patterson said, ladling soup into bowls, "taking care of each other when things get hard." As evening approached, Thomas made his way back to the bakery, his basket empty, his heart full. The snow was still falling, but it slowed somewhat, and he could see lights glowing in windows all across the village, each one representing someone safe and warm, someone who had been checked on, someone who belonged. Inside his apartment, he fed Biscuit and made himself dinner, then settled into his armchair with a cup of tea. The village square outside his window was transformed, unrecognizable under its blanket of snow, peaceful and beautiful in a way that made his chest tight with something he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, maybe, or belonging, or the simple recognition that he was part of something larger than himself. His phone rang several times during the evening, people calling to check in, to report that they were safe, to ask about neighbors. Each call was a thread in the web of connection, and Thomas took each one gladly, offering reassurance, gathering information, coordinating care. At 9 o'clock, Father Michael called. "Thomas, I wanted you to know everyone's accounted for, everyone's safe. Dr. Morrison and David made it to everyone on the outskirts. The church basement has 3 families staying there tonight, and they're comfortable. We did it. The village took care of its own." Thomas felt a wave of emotion at the words. "That's good, Father. That's really good. You were central to making it happen. The way you organized things this morning, made sure everyone knew what to do. Thank you." After he hung up, Thomas sat for a long time looking out at the snow-covered square, at the village he had lived in all his life, the village that held him when he grieved, that gave him purpose every morning, that functioned as a family in the truest sense of the word. Biscuit was asleep by the radiator, his breathing deep and steady, completely at peace. Thomas watched him and thought about how dogs always knew when they were home, when they were safe, when they belonged. And he thought about how humans needed those same things, needed to know that someone would check on them during storms, that their absence would be noticed, that they mattered to people around them. The snow had stopped falling now, and the sky was clearing, stars beginning to appear between the clouds. Tomorrow would be a day of digging out, of checking on people again, of slowly returning to normal rhythms. But tonight, the village rested, everyone safe in their homes, connected by invisible threads of care and mutual responsibility. Thomas made his way to bed, Biscuit following him, settling on his dog bed beside Thomas's own. As he lay in the darkness, listening to the profound quiet that comes after heavy snow, Thomas thought about the letters he had received, about legacy and belonging, about how showing up day after day created something durable and real. The storm was a test in a way, and the village passed it beautifully, not because anyone had done anything extraordinary, but because everyone had done what needed to be done, had reached out to neighbors, had offered what they could, had remembered that they were all in it together. This, Thomas thought as sleep began to claim him, this was what home meant. Not a place exactly, but a network of care, a commitment to showing up, a promise that no one would face hard things alone. Outside, the stars grew brighter, reflecting off the snow, and Snowbell Village rested under its white blanket, peaceful and safe, a community that knew how to take care of its own. The morning after the storm dawned clear and breathtakingly cold, the sky a hard, brilliant blue that seemed to ring like crystal. Thomas stood at his window with his tea, watching the sun rise over the transformed village, everything outlined in white, every branch and fence post and rooftop carrying its burden of snow. The beauty was almost painful in its perfection, and he stood for a long moment just taking it in, feeling grateful to be alive to witness it. Biscuit pressed against his leg, and Thomas reached down to scratch behind his ears. "Beautiful morning, isn't it, boy?" The bakery routine was delayed today. The ovens would still warm, the bread would still rise, but first there was the work of digging out, of clearing paths, of making sure that the village could move again. Thomas dressed in his warmest clothes, found his snow shovel, and headed downstairs with Biscuit. Outside, the cold hit like a physical thing, taking his breath for a moment. But the air smelled clean and sharp, and when he breathed deeply, it seemed to clear his head and wake him completely. The snow had stopped at around 20 inches, Robert's Weather Service prediction nearly perfect. The village square was pristine and untouched, a blank canvas waiting for the first footsteps to mark it. Thomas began shoveling the sidewalk in front of his bakery, following into the rhythm of the work. Lift, throw, step forward, repeat. It was hard physical labor, and soon he was warm despite the cold, his breath coming in white puffs, his muscles working in a way they didn't usually get to during his baking routine. He wasn't alone for long. David Sullivan appeared with his plow truck, clearing the main roads, waving to Thomas as he passed. Then Father Michael emerged from the church with his own shovel, beginning to clear the steps and walkway. Mrs. Patterson came out with her husband, both of them tackling their own sidewalk. One by one, the villagers emerged, everyone doing their part, and gradually the village began to take shape again beneath the snow. By 8 o'clock, Thomas had cleared his own sidewalk and had moved on to help Mrs. Foster with hers. She watched from her window, waving gratefully, and brought him a thermos of coffee when he finished, insisting he come inside to warm up for a moment. "You're a blessing, Thomas Wright," she said, pouring him coffee in her cozy kitchen. "Not everyone would think to help an old woman with her walk." "You're not old, Mrs. Foster," Thomas said, warming his hands on the cup. "And even if you were, that's exactly when people should be helping." She smiled at him with such warmth that he felt it like sunlight. "Your mother raised you right, and Catherine would be proud of the man you are." The mention of his wife brought the usual pang, but it was softened now by time and acceptance. "I hope so," he said quietly. Back at the bakery, he finally fired up the ovens and began the day's baking, later than usual, but still following the familiar patterns. People started arriving mid-morning, coming not just for bread, but to share the experience of the storm, to tell stories about the evening before, to check in with each other and confirm that everyone had made it through safely. Helen Brooks came in with Rachel Moore, both of them rosy-cheeked and smiling. "We had such a lovely evening," Helen reported. "Drank tea, talked for hours, played cards. I haven't had a house guest in years. It was wonderful." Rachel looked more relaxed than Thomas had yet seen her, less anxious, more settled. "Helen told me so many stories about the village. I feel like I'm starting to understand how everything works here, how everyone fits together." "You're fitting in just fine yourself," Thomas told her, and meant it. In the space of a few days, Rachel had been welcomed, had been woven into the fabric of care that made the village work. She belonged here now, even if she didn't fully realize it yet. Throughout the morning, people lingered in the bakery longer than usual, reluctant to return to their individual homes after the enforced togetherness of the storm. Thomas recognized this pattern. After challenges or difficulties, the village always drew closer for a while, cherishing the connections that had been highlighted by need. At noon, Father Michael came in with a proposal. "Thomas, I've been thinking. Christmas is in 5 days, and after this storm, I think people could use some extra celebration, some extra togetherness. What would you think about hosting a Christmas Eve gathering at the church? A proper feast, bring and share style, with music and stories and warmth?" Thomas felt immediate enthusiasm for the idea. "I think that's perfect, Father. I can provide bread, of course, and I bet Helen would help with the tea and coffee."
"I was hoping you'd say that." Father Michael's face creased in a broad smile. "I'll start spreading the word. Everyone welcome, no exceptions. We'll make it a real celebration." As Father Michael left to continue organizing, Thomas thought about Christmas Eve, about how it would feel to gather the whole village together, to share food and warmth and the particular joy that comes from being together during the darkest time of year. It felt right, felt like exactly what they all needed. That afternoon, with the day's baking done and the shop quiet, Thomas sat in his kitchen with a cup of tea and thought about the letters he had received, about legacy and memory. He had photocopied them as Robert had suggested and had posted them on the bulletin board in the shop, where customers had been reading them with deep interest, many of them tearing up at the simple, heartfelt messages. On impulse, he pulled out a piece of paper and began to write his own letter, not to send anywhere, but just to capture his thoughts, to put into words what he was feeling about this life he had built, this community he was part of. "Dear Future," he wrote, "I'm writing this on December 20th, after a big storm brought the village together in beautiful ways. I want you to know that being here, doing this work, showing up every day, it has meant everything to me. The bakery isn't just about bread. It's about creating a place where people feel welcomed, where they know they matter, where they can find warmth on cold mornings. I hope whoever reads this, whenever they read it, knows that the small things matter, the daily routines matter, showing up matters, being kind matters. These are the things that build a life worth living." He signed it and folded it, feeling slightly foolish but also satisfied. He would tuck it away somewhere, maybe in the old recipe journal for someone to find someday. As evening approached, Robert Chen stopped by, not for bread, but just to visit. They sat together in the kitchen, drinking coffee, biscuits snoring softly by the warm oven. "You know," Robert said, "I've been the postmaster here for 35 years, and I've watched this village change and stay the same all at once. New people come, old people pass on, children grow up and move away or stay and raise their own families. But what doesn't change is this, the way we take care of each other, the way showing up every day creates something stable and good." Thomas nodded, recognizing his own thoughts in Robert's words. "You're at the center of that, Thomas. You might not see it, but you are. The bakery is the heart of the village, and you keep it beating steady. That matters more than you know." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I just do what I've always done, nothing special." "That's exactly what makes it special," said Robert gently. "The faithfulness, the consistency, the care. You show up every single day, and that creates a foundation that everyone else can build on." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Thomas thought about foundations, about how the invisible work of showing up day after day created the structure that held everything else. He thought about the letters from people who had left decades ago but still remembered the warmth of the bakery. He thought about Rachel Moore, so quickly folded into the community's embrace. He thought about Mrs. Foster, who sometimes seemed lonely despite being surrounded by people who cared about her. He thought about the young Johnson family, still finding their feet as new parents. He thought about all the people who made up the fabric of this place, each one important, each one contributing their thread to the larger pattern. On impulse, he called Helen Brooks. "Helen, I had an idea about the Christmas Eve gathering." "Tell me," she said, and you could hear the smile in her voice. "What if we asked people to share stories about what the village means to them, or a favorite memory, or something they're grateful for? Make it really personal, really about connection." "Oh, Thomas," Helen breathed. "That's perfect. That's exactly right. People need to hear that they matter to each other. We should definitely do that." They talked for a while longer, planning, imagining how the evening might unfold. When Thomas finally hung up, he felt a deep sense of anticipation, of looking forward to something meaningful. He prepared for bed, Biscuit already settled on his dog bed, the apartment warm and peaceful around them. Outside, the village was quiet under its blanket of snow, lights glowing in windows, smoke rising from chimneys. Everyone safe, everyone cared for, everyone part of the intricate web of connection that made this place home. As Thomas lay in the darkness, he thought about the letter he had written, about legacy and memory and the importance of showing up. He thought about all the mornings yet to come, all the bread yet to be baked, all the people yet to be welcomed through his door. And he thought about how lucky he was to have found his purpose, to know his place in the world,
to be woven so thoroughly into the fabric of this community that he couldn't imagine existing anywhere else. Tomorrow he would wake at 4:30 and begin again. The ovens would warm, the dough would rise, the smell of bread would fill the air. People would come, seeking warmth and nourishment and connection, and he would be there, as he always was, offering what he had to offer, showing up with consistency and care. This was enough. This was more than enough. This was everything. Sleep came gently, peacefully, and Thomas sank into it with gratitude, with contentment, with the deep satisfaction of knowing that his life had meaning and purpose, that he belonged here. Christmas Eve arrived with a gentle snowfall, soft flakes drifting down like blessings, covering the village in fresh white that sparkled under the strings of lights that decorated the square. Thomas woke at 4:30 to find the world transformed once again, magical in the pre-dawn darkness, and he stood at his window for a long moment, simply taking it in, feeling the significance of the day settle over him like a warm shawl. Biscuit was already awake, sensing something special about this morning, his tail wagging slowly as he watched Thomas move through the familiar routine. There was something about Christmas Eve that made everything feel more important, more meaningful, as if the ordinary actions of making tea and starting the ovens were somehow sacred. Today's baking would be special. Thomas had planned for it, had ordered extra flour and butter, and had prepared to make more bread and pastries than he had made in years. The Christmas Eve gathering would need food, lots of it, and he wanted to contribute abundantly, wanted his offering to be generous and warm and worthy of the occasion. He worked steadily through the dark hours, his hands moving through the familiar motions, but his mind was full of anticipation and gratitude. The kitchen filled with warmth and the smell of yeast and cinnamon, of bread and sweet rolls, and the special Christmas stollen he has learned to make from Mr. Hendricks decades ago, a recipe passed down through generations of bakers. As dawn broke, the snow still falling gently, Thomas paused to look out at the village waking up. Lights were coming on earlier than usual, people stirring in anticipation of the evening's gathering. He could see smoke rising from chimneys, could imagine families beginning their own preparations, children excited about the celebration to come. At 7 o'clock, when he opened the bakery doors, there was already a line of people waiting, everyone smiling, everyone carrying the particular energy that comes on special days. The shop filled quickly with conversation and laughter, with people buying bread for their own Christmas preparations, but also lingering to talk, to share their excitement, to be part of the collective anticipation. Margaret Foster arrived with a carefully wrapped package, which she presented to Thomas with ceremonial gravity. "I've been working on this since I read those letters you posted," she said. "I wanted to contribute something to the bakery's history." Thomas opened the package to find a beautifully bound book, its cover leather, its pages thick and cream-colored. Inside, Margaret had created a history of the bakery, photographs she had collected from various villagers, stories about Mr. Hendricks and Thomas's father and Thomas himself, quotes from the letters that had arrived, and space for future entries, future memories. "Margaret," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep adding to it," she replied, her eyes bright. "Say you'll keep the history going, keep recording the small moments that make up a life."
He promised he would, and they stood together looking at the book, at the photographs of the bakery in different eras, at the carefully transcribed stories about kindness and warmth and the importance of showing up. Helen Brooks came in mid-morning, bringing supplies for the evening's tea and coffee service, her face glowing with excitement. I can't remember the last time I looked forward to something this much. The whole village gathering together, sharing food and stories. It's going to be beautiful. Rachel Moore appeared shortly after, carrying a guitar case and looking slightly nervous. I thought maybe I could play some music tonight if that would be all right. Christmas carols, some folk songs, whatever people want to sing. Thomas felt his heart expand at the thought of music filling the church, of Rachel finding her place in the community through her gift. That would be perfect, he told her, absolutely perfect. The day unfolded in a blur of activity and preparation. Thomas baked continuously, filling basket after basket with bread and rolls and pastries. People stopped in throughout the day, dropping off dishes for the evening's feast, sharing their excitement, offering to help with last-minute preparations. The village was alive with purpose and joy, everyone contributing their part to the collective celebration. At 4 o'clock, Thomas closed the bakery and loaded his car with the bread he had made, Biscuit sitting in the passenger seat, watching the activity with calm interest. They drove the short distance to the church where Father Michael and a group of volunteers were transforming the parish hall into a feast space, long tables set end to end, decorated with evergreen boughs and candles. The next 2 hours were a flurry of preparation. Thomas arranged his bread on serving platters, helped carry in chairs, greeted people as they arrived with their contributions to the feast. The tables gradually filled with food, casseroles and roasts, salads and vegetables, pies and cakes and cookies. The abundance was almost overwhelming, a physical manifestation of the village's generosity and care. At 6 o'clock, as the sun set and the snow continued its gentle fall outside the windows, Father Michael called everyone to gather. The parish hall was packed. It seemed like every person in Snowbell Village had come, from the oldest to the youngest, everyone dressed in their holiday best, everyone glowing with anticipation. "Welcome," Father Michael said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "Welcome to our Christmas Eve celebration. We're here tonight not just to share a meal, but to celebrate what makes Snowbell Village special, each other. The connections we've built, the care we show, the way we show up for one another day after day." He paused, looking around at the gathered faces. "Before we eat, I want to invite anyone who feels moved to share a story, a memory, a word of gratitude. This is our time to tell each other what we mean to one another." There was a moment of silence, and then Mrs. Foster stood, her voice clear and strong despite her 73 years. "I want to thank this village for holding me when my husband died, for showing up with meals and companionship, for never letting me feel alone. I want to especially thank Thomas Wright, who checks on me during storms and shovels my walk and makes me feel like I still matter." Thomas felt tears prick his eyes as she sat down to warm applause. Robert Chen stood next. "I've been postmaster here for 35 years, and I've watched this village grow and change. But what hasn't changed is the way we take care of each other, the way we notice when someone's struggling and step in to help. I'm grateful to be part of a place where people still believe in showing up, in being present, in doing the small things that make a big difference." One by one, people stood to share. Helen Brooks talked about how the village had welcomed her after her divorce, had given her a place to belong when she felt lost. Dr. Morrison shared memories of growing up here, of how the bakery had been a constant through all the changes of his life. Young Emma Chen, prompted by her mother, shyly said she loved how everyone knew her name and asked about her piano lessons. Then Rachel Moore stood, her voice shaking slightly. "I've only been here for 2 weeks, but I already feel more at home than I did in the city where I lived for 10 years. You've welcomed me with such warmth, such generosity. Helen took me in during the storm. Thomas made sure I had bread and gave me the number for the handyman. People I barely know smile at me on the street and ask how I'm settling in. I didn't know communities like this still existed, and I'm so grateful to have found you." She sat down to enthusiastic applause, and Thomas saw tears streaming down her face, tears of relief and belonging and the particular joy that comes from finding your place in the world. More people shared stories about neighbors helping neighbors, about small kindnesses that had meant everything, about the ways the village had sustained them through difficult times. Each story added another thread to the tapestry of connection, another reminder of why this place was special, why it mattered. Finally, Father Michael invited Thomas to share, and Thomas stood slowly, not sure what he would say until the words came. "I received some letters a few weeks ago," he began, "from people who had lived here decades ago and still remembered the bakery, still remembered feeling welcomed and cared for. Those letters showed me that what we do every day, the small acts of showing up, of being kind, of creating warmth, these things echo forward through time in ways we can't always see." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm just a baker. I make bread. But I've learned that making bread is also about making community, about creating a place where people can gather and connect and feel like they belong. And I've learned that I don't do that alone. Every one of you contributes to making Snowbell Village what it is. We do it together." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "My wife Catherine used to say that showing up is the most important thing, not grand gestures or heroic acts, just the daily practice of being present, being consistent, being there for each other. And I see that here tonight in all of you. You show up, you care, you create home for each other, and I'm so grateful to be part of it." He sat down to sustained applause, Biscuit leaning against his leg, and he felt the truth of what he had said settle into his bones. This was his life's work, not the bread itself, but the connection it created, the gathering place it provided, the sense of belonging it nurtured. After the sharing, they feasted together, passing dishes around the long tables, conversation and laughter filling the hall. Thomas found himself moving from group to group, greeting people, accepting thanks, feeling the warmth of community surround him like an embrace. Rachel brought out her guitar after dinner and led them in carols, her voice clear and true, and soon everyone was singing, some on key, some not, but all together, all joyful. They sang Silent Night and Joy of the World and O Come All Ye Faithful, the old familiar words taking on new meaning in this gathering of neighbors and friends. At 9 o'clock, as the celebration began to wind down, Father Michael led them in a final blessing. "Go in peace," he said. "Go knowing that you are loved, that you belong, that you matter to the people around you. And come back tomorrow and the day after and keep showing up, keep building this community we've created together." People began to leave slowly, reluctant to end the evening, bundling into coats and scarves, calling out wishes for Merry Christmas, promising to see each other soon. Thomas helped clean up, washing dishes alongside Helen and Rachel and others, the work made light by many hands and continued conversation. Finally, he and Biscuit walked home through the snow, which had stopped falling now, leaving the village pristine and perfect under a sky full of stars. The square was quiet, the shops dark except for their strings of lights, everything peaceful and still. In his apartment, Thomas made tea and sat in his armchair, Biscuit already asleep by the radiator, the events of the evening playing through his mind like a movie. He thought about the stories people had shared, about the connections that had been celebrated and strengthened, about Rachel's tears of belonging and Mrs. Foster's gratitude, and the way the whole village had come together in joy and care. He pulled out the history book that Margaret had given him and opened it to the first blank page. In his careful handwriting, he began to record the evening, the gathering, the stories, the sense of community and purpose that had filled the parish hall. This was important, he thought. This needed to be remembered. When he finished writing, he set the book aside and simply sat, looking out at the snow-covered square, at the village he had lived in all his life, feeling a deep contentment settle over him. Tomorrow he would wake at 4:30 and the familiar routine would begin again. The ovens would warm, the dough would rise, the smell of bread would fill the air. People would come, seeking nourishment and warmth and connection. And he would be there, as he always was, offering what he had to offer, showing up with consistency and care, continuing the work that gave his life meaning and purpose. The work of creating home, of building community, of making sure that everyone who came through his door felt welcomed and valued and seen. He thought about the letters he had received, about legacy and memory, about how the small daily acts of kindness create something larger than ourselves, something that echoes forward through time. He thought about Rachel finding her place in the village, about the storm bringing everyone together, about the Christmas Eve gathering and all the stories of connection and care. This was what mattered, he thought, not the bread itself, though the bread was important, but the gathering it created, the connections it nurtured, the sense of belonging it fostered. This was the real work, the work of helping people know that they mattered, that they belonged, that they were part of something larger than themselves. Outside, the stars blazed in the cold night sky, reflecting off the snow, and Snowbell Village rested in perfect peace, a community that knew how to take care of its own, a place where showing up every day created something beautiful and enduring. Thomas finished his tea and prepared for bed, moving through the familiar evening routine with gratitude and contentment. Tomorrow would come, and with it the chance to begin again, to offer bread and warmth and welcome, to be part of the continuing story of this village and its people. As he lay in the darkness, Biscuit's gentle snoring the only sound, Thomas thought about all the mornings yet to come, all the people yet to welcome, all the connections yet to be made. The work would continue, the bread would rise, and the village would endure, held together by the invisible threads of care and consistency and showing up. This was enough. This was more than enough. This was everything. And in the morning, when the December dawn came soft and silver, Thomas would wake at 4:30, just as he always did, and begin again. The ovens would warm, filling the kitchen with their steady heat. The dough would come together under his hands, familiar and right. Biscuit would wake and stretch and take his place by the warm ovens. And the bread would rise, as it always did, patient and reliable and true. And so we come to the end of Thomas's story. Though, of course, in Snowbell Village, the mornings continue. The oven warms, the bread rises, Biscuit waits by the door. The villagers gather, again and again, building home together. As you lie here now, warm beneath your blankets, safe in your bed,
Let yourself hold on to this feeling, the knowledge that showing up matters, that the small things, the daily bread, the kind word, the gentle presence, these are what create belonging. Take one more deep breath in and release it slowly, completely. Feel how heavy your body has become. Your arms rest peacefully at your sides. Your legs are warm and still. Your breathing is slow, natural, easy. Your mind is quiet now, settled like fresh snow. If you're still awake, that's perfectly all right. Just let yourself float here in this peaceful space. And if you wake during the night, remember the warm glow of the bakery window. Remember Biscuit's contented sigh by the fire. Remember that tomorrow the oven will warm again, and there will always be enough. Rest now, dear one. Let sleep find you gently. The bread will rise again in the morning. Good night.